Hello everyone, and welcome to this virtual event. My name is Sarah Hollenbeck, and I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First. We are one of the last feminist bookstores in the United States, and we're honored to host this virtual celebration for the release of This Boy We Made, a memoir of motherhood, genetics, and facing the unknown by Taylor Harris. And we're thrilled to have Jessamine Chan join us for this conversation with Taylor. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events held here in the bookstore with a land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native literature and community. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. A good place to start is nativeland.ca. Women and Children First here in Chicago is actually closed once again due to the current surge in COVID cases here. But we continue to offer curbside pickup, and we ship anywhere in the United States. All of our upcoming virtual events are virtual still, including the virtual launch of The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan, which will be happening here on Crowdcast on January 12th at 7 o'clock. A few little notes. If you have a question for the authors, be sure to use the Ask a Question box located at the bottom of your screen. If you haven't bought Taylor's incredible book, you can do so by clicking the Buy the Book button, also located at the bottom of your screen. If you know anyone who couldn't tune in right now, don't worry. This event is being recorded, and you can watch it anytime here on Crowdcast. We'll also upload a version with closed captioning within a week or two to our YouTube channel. Okay, and now on to the main event. Taylor Harris is a writer, wife, and mom of 3. She lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, and her work has appeared in Time, O, The Washington Post, Long Reads, The Cut, Romper, Parent, McSweeney's, and many other publications. Jessamine Chan's short stories have appeared in Tin House and Epic. A former reviewer for Publishers Weekly, she holds an MFA from Columbia University School of the Arts and a BA from Brown. Her work has received support from the Elizabeth George Foundation, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Wurlitzer Foundation, the Virginia Center for the Arts, and Ragdale, among many others. And she now lives in Oak Park with her husband and daughter. I just want to briefly say how much I loved both of these books. Taylor Harris's memoir is incredibly deftly written. The storytelling and the vulnerability is just radiating off the page. And I just believe the world needs more mothers being honest and vulnerable about their stories, and giving one another the space to trust our guts when we know something's wrong. This was such an incredible memoir, and I could not wait for this conversation. So please join me in welcoming Jessamine Chan and Taylor Harris.
Hi, Taylor. I just want to make sure that, can you hear me, or is there an echo?
Yeah, I'm getting it. That's better.
Okay, are things functional now with the, okay, hold on a second.
Okay. I can't hear you, but you look good.
Oh, no.
Oh, now I hear you.
Okay, voice is happening and you can hear me.
You came prepared. That's really smart.
Okay, First of all, I want to say thank you for introducing yourself over Twitter. I used to kind of roll my eyes about people making friends over Twitter, but this is one case when this is true. Okay, quick. Is there still an echo?
No, it's just my 60-pound like golden doodle decided to bark for the first time today as you started like talking, but you sound great.
Okay, so you can hear me. Great.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could start off by reading.
Let's see. This feels very 2022. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to start out reading from a section of the book where we have taken my son Tophs, or his real name is Christopher, but we call him Tophs, to see a developmental pediatrician. And this doctor was like known all through Charlottesville where we lived and had a long wait list. So it was like a really big deal to finally get everybody together and to walk into this appointment and hopefully get some answers about what was ailing Tophs. He drew a horizontal line. "Can you draw this for me?" he asked. Tophs did. Then he drew a vertical line. "How about this?" Tophs's lines were shakier, fainter, made with a fisted grip, but they were there. "Well, that's good news," Dr. Perry said. "The fact that he was able to copy those lines means his intelligence is at least on the low side of average." Had he just handed us a life vest or shot a hole through our boat? He finished examining Tophs in about 10 minutes and then sat Paul and me down while Tophs and Elliot played. When I look at his records, the poor growth, carnitine deficiency, history of hypoglycemia, and now global developmental delay, he's got something. We're just not smart enough to figure it out yet. Something global yet. This wasn't a fluke. Tophs had stumped the best. I processed this much before the tunnel started to narrow. Given your levels of education, he's certainly an outlier. Outlier. Like begets like, each seed after its own kind. I think he should see genetics again for whole exome sequencing, and he should have every new wave of genetic testing that becomes available. Science is moving so fast, and what we don't know now, we might know in 10 years. Maybe one day somebody in Europe will discover the Christopher syndrome. Every new test, Europe, my boy as a syndrome. And then as the conversation wound down, if he were my son, I'd go ahead and schedule a brain MRI. As I sat across from Dr. Perry, I heard outlier as a painful marker of deficit. What did it mean that our son looked small but fine on the outside, yet was struggling to communicate, to understand? What if he was lonely or frustrated or scared and couldn't tell us? What if the world was closed off to him in ways it remained wide open to me? This type of limitation was not what I'd imagined for my child, and the painful path between mystery and atypical, which was really no path at all, was not the one I thought I'd travel. The first time I heard the term liminal, I was 18, sitting in an African American Studies 101 class at the University of Virginia. A tall and slender Professor Penningroth, his complexion like my mother's relatives, had written the words "middle passage" in the center of a blackboard. He walked us through not just the number of Black bodies taken or the number of years over which they were stolen, but what it might have been like to be yanked into a void, to live or die between what was and what would be. Liminal comes from the Latin word for threshold. When your life, your customs, your expectations are ripped away, as in the case of slaves, or if they disintegrate through grief and mystery, you stand at this threshold. On one side, I see the disintegration of my assumptions about myself, motherhood, my children. In the space between, the space of not yet, I tread water while going to doctor's appointments and Googling, while noticing illnesses or quirks or developmental delays, while waiting for the one doctor on the right ship to come scoop us up from the depths. On the other side, who knows? I'd always assumed the other side was an answer, a new set of boundaries, a new territory to navigate and accept. I'm not sure I would know the other side now if it slapped me in the face. How do you recognize the thing you're looking for when it has no name, no shape? Someday, someone in Europe. This space can be relentless in its power to hold my imagination captive, to dash what's beautiful and true to pieces. Because as I sit across from the doctor and hear outlier, as I push off into the deep, I do not think about the way Tophs wakes up early one morning to put together a puzzle all by himself, nor how he intuitively cups my face in his hands and gazes into my eyes. I cannot yet know he is capable of ordering a metal yo-yo off Amazon without any instruction. Because Tophs will think about and do things we would never think of or be able to do at such a young age, or ever. Outlier. Somehow these truths deserve to make it to the other side, even if my hands are heavy with doubt. Moses instructed the Israelites to remember the words of the God who had delivered them from slavery. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. If the great doctor never comes along in his great boat, if I never get to the other side, I want someone to find me. I want them to see every dream for Tophs stamped across my forehead, the names of his gifts written on my forearms.
Ugh, what just happened? Are you... sorry about that. Thank you so much for that reading. I wanted to start off at the beginning and ask, when did you consider yourself a writer?
Yeah, I love that question because for me it starts when I was in first grade, and I'm this, Black girl in mostly a predominantly white neighborhood and school system and class for sure. And I had this teacher, Mrs. Hall. Her name's Mindy, but I still can't call her Mindy. Always Mrs. Hall. And she just saw me. I don't know what was being taught. This was like her first or second year, I think, out of college or getting her master's. And she was young and hip. And, I don't know what was taught then in school about like differentiating instruction, but I know that she saw me. And so I would write in my journal and I would make these things, very 80s, I would make these things called wallpaper books that were literally out of wallpaper. And she would give me extra time to do that. So the other kids would go play with like math manipulatives and blocks and things. And she would be like, you go, like you stay there, or you go out in the hallway if you want and just write. And so I think that's the first time someone really saw me. And then, we go on from there. I went to college. I didn't hate writing papers. I got married after college, and my husband found this writing program at Johns Hopkins that did creative nonfiction. And I was like, that's a thing? Like, I thought you had to write poetry or news or novels. And those were things that I wasn't fantastic at. And so that really got me started. And then I think, honestly, you might feel this way too, but sometimes it's like a day-by-day process where you have to fight the imposter syndrome. You have to tell yourself that you're a writer and that it's not based necessarily on publication. I used to think that, like, okay, I'll graduate, I got a master's in writing, and like my first big publication, like then I'll be a writer. And I feel like you could do the same thing with a book, right? Like, once I publish my debut, like then I'll be an author, and it's just sort of like, what's going to happen? Like tomorrow, if I'm like lucky enough to wake up, like I'm going to have to still face down that voice that's sort of like, well, did you do enough by 38? Like, what are you up to? What are you going to, what we've talked about, what are you going to do next? Like, are you still going to prove yourself? And so some of the best advice I got was from Michelle Martin. I spent a summer interning at NPR. And I remember writing something to her in an email like, and then I want to try and be a writer. And she was like, no, you are a writer. And I've always remembered that.
So I'm having some echo issues, so I'm just going to speak into here and hope that you can hear me.
Okay.
I also wanted to start at the beginning and say, how did this project begin? And at what point did you know that you were working on a book?
Yeah, that's also kind of funny because sometimes I feel like the book thankfully sold on proposal. But then like that's how nonfiction can go, right? But then you like get so excited and you sign the contract and then you're like, crap, like now I have to write the book. And so in some ways I feel like I wasn't working on the book until the contract was signed and I was like, now I have to produce. But I've also been like really fortunate to have people in my life who just sort of like will mention something, suggest something, and then back off and let me think about it and then come back. And I feel like when I think about this book, Nicole Chung is one of those people who knows me as like, she's edited me. She edited a column I did for Catapult about genetics and Tophs. And I just remember her sort of coming up to me and being like, hey, have you thought about a book? Have you thought about a book proposal? Do you want to start working on one? And I tend to be like, oh, that's so nice of you. Thank you. Thank you. And then I need time like by myself alone to process. And I feel like Nikki might have come back again, like one or two other times, like, hey, do you want to talk to my editor? She's really great. And finally, at some point I said yes. And I had like part of an outline done that we sent to Julie Bunton, who became my editor. And I'm so happy because I can't believe this book is done and she's been fantastic. So it's just fun to say her name. But anyway, she sent me initial notes just on like this half of a proposal I had. And I knew from her notes that like she was definitely the one. So I'm thankful to those people. Like you just don't know the people who will just speak like one word and kind of back away and then come again and give you space and time to process. For me, those people have been really important in my life.
So sorry to have the tech issues over here. I know that this question is really fraught, but I'm amazed that you are publishing this book while raising 3 children in a pandemic. And everyone always asks, like, how do you get it all done? Mm. So if I may ask a version of that, and say, how did you carve out the time to work on this book while doing all the other roles in your life?
I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, but to be honest, like, I don't know. Like, for one, there's screen time. Let's just put that on the table. Like,
awesome.
Taylor Harris said screen time. But for really, like, having my husband is really supportive, and there are times where, we've been together. We've been married 16 years, and so he knows my strengths. He knows sometimes even what I won't do for myself. And so there were times where he came to the table and was like, look, you have this commitment, you have this deadline, whatever, this book eventually, let's carve out time for you. Like, let's make a schedule. He's a very practical person, has all these like administrative skills that my creative brain lacks. And so when we come together, it's helpful because it's like, I know what I'm passionate about. I sort of know what I want to do, but how to get there when there's all these things to juggle for me, that's not really where I shine, and it is where he shines. And so I think for me, having a helpful spouse like that to help me schedule things. And then the kids, like, just to be honest, the kids are getting older. My youngest is 5, oldest is 11. And so do they fight a lot? And do we like need to break up like wrestling matches? Yes. But there are some things they can do alone. Like, gone are the days of like holding the car seat and pushing the double stroller, which is a whole different era of motherhood. And I did write some in those years, but that's just, for me, I look back and I'm like, that's a whole different level of tired. Like, my kids still sometimes wake us up in the middle of the night, but it's not the same as like getting up to pump or to nurse. And I'm not saying you can't write during those times. I'm just saying I think I've shifted into a different phase of motherhood.
I'm definitely still in the not holding a car seat phase, but in the like trying to get the child out the door phase. And thank you for the acknowledgement of screen time, which is very important. So talking about the book structure, could you talk about how you figured out to juxtapose your childhood and your experience of parenthood? Because I thought the structure was just so genius. And I just want to acknowledge writing nonfiction is so much harder than writing fiction in my mind.
No way.
No, it totally is. And I just wanted to see, did you know it would be structured like that at the very beginning, or did you find that structure along the way?
No, and that's where I'm really thankful to my editor, Julie, for just sort of like, again, I think another person who sort of intuitively understands how I'm built, that I can be anxious and that I'm going to be my biggest doubter. And so I would send her something. She just kept saying, Taylor, get the story down, because, you know, like you just want to stop and correct. And she would just keep encouraging me. And then at some point I would get most of the story out and she'd be like, in her nice way, just be like, this isn't working, or this part isn't working for me. And so she just almost like scaffolded the process. So it wasn't like, you know, the first draft I gave her, I'm sure belonged in the dumpster, but like, she didn't tell me that. It was very much like, okay, I see, like, this is great. Let's look at this. And so I have a book somewhere, hold on. So yeah, Jesse's book was actually really helpful. So sort of like I connect, we were talking about this earlier, I really connect to your book. It really resonated with me, like the questions that your character Frida is asking and the way she's watched and surveilled. And similarly with, even though this is a novel, the way she works back and forth between storylines, and maybe because she brings up the topics of like mental health and she's a scientist and race, right? So there are all these different topics and areas that I related to. And so I never expected to read a novel and sort of help and use it to help me with my structure. But that's sort of what ended up helping me pull the pieces together. And then that practical husband I mentioned, he's the one who makes sure, he's like, you know what, like we should have life insurance. And I'm like, oh, I thought we were buying sneakers with our money. And he painted like a dry erase wall in our office. And so I was able to just like take the pieces of my story that I knew I wanted to share, the pieces of Tophs' story or my role as a mom, and just sort of see like where they come.
So I think it's really fascinating that you used a novel structure to help structure a memoir. Jumping off that point, who are some of your literary influences? And were there any particular memoirs or writers or art or culture that you were referring to along the way to help you keep going?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, so anybody that you see who kindly took a chance on a debut writer and blurred my book, those were people who I looked at. One of those is Megan O'Connell, who wrote about motherhood, and she's always my muse for like, guess what? You can be kind of funny on the page and it's okay. I feel like it's like every author plays a different role. Nikki Chung was a big deal, right? To write her story, one thing I learned from her is like, you know, you can have an arc without the ending being like a total surprise. Because as you know, with the way that my book ends, it's not the ending of like a great movie necessarily. Like, do I think it could be a movie? Yes. But it's not necessarily the ending that some of us want. And so how do you bring the reader along for a story that maybe doesn't have like a fireworks type of ending? Also, this book called Happiness. This was an amazing book that I'd never heard of, and Julie again introduced me to this book. And then you just have like, There's so many. You have like rock stars like Jessamine Ward, where you're like, well, I'm not gonna be Jessamine Ward, but like, like maybe I can find something to steal from her. Her memoir is amazing, and she really plays with structure. It's like it goes like forwards and backwards and meets in the middle. And Natasha Treataway, the poet, she wrote a memoir about her mother's death that was really gripping. And so I know I'm forgetting a lot of people and will beat myself up, but just know I'm like turning around, grabbing books because they've all been so important to me.
I just want to say we're going to open things up to audience questions in a little bit. So there is an ask a question button at the bottom of the screen if you would like to chime in with a question of your own, and I'll be sure to read those out. One question that I've been getting that I will pose to you, because it seems very applicable to our life right now, is what do you think the role of fear is in motherhood? Because I was really struck by your book being the perfect book for parenting right now and just being a person right now, because it's really about existing in a liminal space. Yeah. So what role does writing play in that, and faith, and how did you get through this time?
I think it's like this tension between sort of like, it's hard because if you so I'm a lifelong therapy goer. Let's just get that out there. And so you learn something.
Feel free to seg to a answer about therapy.
So I've been working on like cognitive behavioral strategies forever. And part of that, in a weird way, do not quote this, but in a weird way, it's almost learning to distrust yourself. Like you're sort of saying this irrational thought, like that's actually not something that you have to put a lot of faith in. So on one hand, like I've learned to sort of have this firewall when it comes to my thoughts of does this thought get in? Like, is this thought rational, or do we keep it out here? And so that's some of that tension that I ran into with Tophs. Like, he's not like the morning he woke up when he was 22 months, it's like, he's not vomiting. He had been in previous days, but he'd stopped. He had a full dinner. He has no fever. He is waking up. He's just then falling back asleep. He's drinking water, so he's not completely dehydrated. Like does this get through the firewall? But then I think the other side of that tension is like, I do have an intuition. Like I do pray. I do have people around me, like Paul, who I check in with my husband to be like, what is this? Does this make sense? And sometimes I think that's the hard part, is that like you do have to trust yourself. And so on one hand, you're learning like to distrust, and on the other hand, you're learning to trust. And so I feel like I live a lot in that tension. When it comes to things like COVID, I really find myself looking to like experts, and you'll see in the book, right? It was sort of like, well, what does the NIH have to say? And I think for me, that's helpful. Like, I think I reach toward faith, and I reach toward like scientific knowledge to sort of anchor me. So my friend, Dr. Tyson Bell, you've probably heard of, he's been on a lot of like shows talking about how to keep us safe during COVID. And so I find myself like, okay, I'm scared of this. Like, what does Tyson say? And I find I do that in different areas of my life to sort of, just help give me some stability, I think.
So I'm going to jump from there, and related to therapy, I have to say I related so much to the depiction of anxiety in this book. And I certainly am someone who struggled with clinical anxiety for all my life. And this is the first time in a book where I'm like, oh, someone's been through this. And I definitely related to being a high achieving teenager who had to mask all the mental health struggles with school performance and excellence and fulfilling all the like model person of color roles. And I wanted to ask, how does that experience, the struggle that you've had with mental health, inform your parenting decisions?
So hard. I mean, I'll start with, I think what resonates with me specifically is that sort of that drive, right? Like, you know, for me, I was one of the few Black girls in high school. I played tennis, like I captained the team. I don't know, like I gave our commencement speech, and there are these like markers that I think I clung to, and I don't think I was wrong to. Like, I think one thing I've learned in therapy is to kind of go back and pat that 16, 17, 18-year-old on the back and say, like, well done. Like, you did what you needed to do to get through feeling awfully lonely. But like, does that work for me as a 38-year-old mom? And so some of that sort of drive and you know, what we've talked about, that type A bit, perfectionist bit, it's really hard. Like it's hard for me to not bring that into the way that I parent my kids. And that's one of those things it's not really fair to them, but I'll be honest, just that it's a battle. It's like, you know, it's them bringing home a test or taking one of those, I don't know, the billion standardized tests that they take already, where it's like, oh, you're in this percentile out of 100. And I'm like, really, that's not great for me to see right now. And so then how do I reframe that? And how do I encourage them without it? You know, for me growing up, it was, my parents didn't say that we needed to get straight A's, but we did. And so it was just like, that was a way to say, I'm okay. And so now as a parent, if my kids aren't necessarily doing that, or if they have different challenges or needs, that can't be the way to say we're okay. Like, we have to be okay without that. And so for me, that's something I'm still learning.
I'm going to jump in with an audience question here. Amy Schaflet asks, your writing is infused with so much fantastic wit and humor, but also mixed with incredible personal vulnerability, which as a writer is incredibly scary to me. Any tips on how to work through this?
Amy, speaking of tennis, was on my tennis team. We called her Shippy, so I'm just going to call her Shippy now because I can. But anyway, thanks for the question. It is scary. I mean, the one thing I can say is that when I was in grad school, one of the questions I asked my favorite professor and advisor was, you know, can you be literary and funny? And he said something to the effect of like, it's hard because if you stay on that, you know, comic tip too long, it's not going to go deep enough to be literary. But he's like, I think you can. And I think if anyone can do it, you can. And like, I don't even know if he believed that, but I feel like we need somebody in our life like that to tell us that. And so I always kept that with me. And then I think also just reading different writers who can be funny and have something to say. So again, like when I mentioned Megan O'Connell as a funny mom writer, or like Anne Lamott, I find does it well. And again, I'm going to be forgetting people who are hilarious, and I'll be mad watching this back. But I think for me, finding people who nobody's going to write just like you, but finding people where, you know, part of their voice resonates with you is always helpful. Also, I think that's just who I am. Like, if you were like, Taylor, you can't like crack one joke, like I'd probably just stop.
So I'm going to shift to, I think, an essay that I saw in Time magazine where there's this amazing quote where you say, I owe the preservation of my imagination to my children. And I was wondering, the impossible question that your book poses so beautifully is how to raise Black children with an awareness of the dangers of the world while creating space for them to be kids and experience joy. And I was really moved by reading how hard you and Paul fought on Tophs' behalf with administrators, with doctors. I mean, in our life, we get stressed out just even dealing with the insurance company for half an hour. So I can't imagine like 9 years of battle. So I wanted to ask, how do you toggle between those goals, like keeping your child safe, aware, having the talk, but also allowing space for joy.
Yeah. I think, again, in parenting, Paul and I are probably a good balance. I tend to, I can be black or white. Like, I can go very, very hard on the truth. And I like to just say up front, like, things that I'm not sure I did well. There was a book, there's a great children's book out, but it does talk about police brutality. And because our youngest, she has these older siblings, and she, wants to keep up with them the same way I did with my big sisters growing up. And so she's gotten a hold of some of this information earlier, maybe, than I had planned. And so now for her, death almost equates with like getting shot by a police officer. Like, it's not getting cancer or getting in a car accident. It's very much death looks this one way. And that's been hard. Like, I don't think, in the book, I share about what learning about mortality did to me at 5. And I don't think you can guess like how a child will react to that news that we all die. For me, it was shattering, and it's still something that I struggle with coming to terms with. And so I didn't know my youngest would react that way, but she has. And then you have, Tophs, who more is like actually pretty balanced with it. Like, sort of like, watch out, like, sometimes cops like aren't going to be the greatest with Black people, guys. But then he's like, listen to this new song by like John Batiste, and like, like, let's dance. And so I actually feel like he balances it really well. Right now, my oldest is in a time where she's reading a lot of like historical fiction. She's reading a book now, I can't think of the name, but based on the church bombing. And so we get to talk about that. So I think we've got the truth thing down. I think if I wanted to grow in an area as a parent, it would be spaces to cultivate that joy. But I mean, there are unexpected ways. So again, during the pandemic, we've kept our circle small. So more screen time. We're in a new city, and they ran through all the episodes of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And so it's really funny. It's actually really funny to go back and watch with them and see like which jokes land and which ones you're like, whoa, like Uncle Phil, you can't say that. Like, that's so patriarchal. But anyway, it's been like a really good time. And so I think some of that will come up organically. Like, I don't think we have to always plan to have those moments. I do think we have to work hard to build community. And so I think there's somebody actually I saw on here who we've met up with their family here in this new town, because like, I don't think it's a secret. We're in Pennsylvania, and we're not in Philly, and there might not be like a lot of Black people here. Anyway, I'm rambling, but we do sort of work to build community also. And I think that helps protect them against some of the other things they have to encounter, like at school.
I think this might be a related question, but I was really also moved by you were writing about faith. Mm. And I was wondering, in your writing and your parenting, what about your Christianity has helped you survive the unknown?
Mm. That's so good. First, I'll say that I think my Christianity shifted some, right? Through this, raising Tophs has made me acknowledge that, like, I'm not letting go of Jesus. Like, that's not gonna happen for me, and I'm not letting go of raising Tophs. And so, like, these two have to come together. And what that means is I'm not okay with sort of the pat answers of, like, the things you hear, like, God won't put more on you than you can bear, or like, like, but isn't he such a blessing? Like, isn't it just like a blessing? And I'm like, yeah, like, he's amazing, he's great, but like, no, it's not just a blessing. Like, it's really hard. And so I think making space for like your theology to change and develop has been a big part. And then if you listen to Tophs, the dude just is like, he's got this sixth sense. Like, he reminds me of like, if we were going to put on a play, like, he would be like John the Baptist. like out there like eating locusts and saying really prophetic stuff. He's just got this other sense about him, almost like he's been here before. Even though like I really don't do reincarnation, but I like there's this other thing he's got going on. And so I think even just giving him space to talk is really helpful. And for me, a reminder that like, oh, this dude, like he's gonna have some challenges. There are some ways that, like you've mentioned, we're fighting the school system sometimes or the hospital, the medical system. But he's really spectacular, and there's something he's doing that I haven't seen in anybody else, and I just feel like I get to be here for that. And for me, that definitely speaks of like the divine. And so I think it's like a give and take between both of them. Like my theology is shifting, my motherhood, my parenting is constantly shifting. And if you follow me on Twitter long enough, you'll see me like rant about, you know, evangelicalism sometimes, even though, you know, I'll always be a Christian. But I think the church has gotta make some room for stories like this.
One thing that really struck me about your book was after I read it, I thought, I can only hope to love my daughter as much as you love your children, because your book was such a profound testament to how closely you see them. And also I was just really stunned by just how well you know them, and really inspired by your parenting and your marriage. And I promised that I wasn't going to just ask you a bunch of life advice questions, but on a practical level, for readers who are coming to this book and who might be in a similar situation where they are advocating for their children of color in the medical system or the school system, and dealing with disparities in treatment, do you have any words of wisdom for fighting that battle, which is endlessly hard, especially during the pandemic?
Yeah. I would say, and I can only speak from sort of my vantage point, what is difficult for me, and that is fighting alone. And so for me, it looks like having my husband there, or it looks like texting my best friend from college, or texting other moms who might have been through a similar IEP process or medical hardship, or it might even be texting like, I keep saying texting because I'm an introvert and I don't call anyone unless I'm like ordering pizza. But my point is, like, it doesn't have to be a spouse. I'm just saying, in my book, that's the example, because Paul is great to help sort of anchor me, but have somebody there if you feel like you're tired. I think it's helpful to have, to sort of just like have that 911 person to be like, hey, they're saying this. I am so tired of fighting. I know my child needs help. Am I crazy? Like, are they right? And you might not be the type who needs that. But I just have noticed it's really easy to sit in a room or in a doctor. I just was at a doctor appointment, not in State College, but somewhere else, where I'm sure the doctor was well-meaning, but everything, I was being gaslit basically. And I feel like that is it's so easy for that to happen. And so for me, I would just say, have somebody on tap that you can call or text or whatever, and don't sign any document if you are not sure. I mean, I think for me, that almost breaking point that I mentioned in the book, where we're in that, it's called an eligibility meeting. It's not exactly an IEP meeting, but similar idea, where I almost sign and Tophs will be kicked out of special education services because I'm just so tired. And Paul says, hey, I think we need a second to breathe. That was so important. So it doesn't have to be a Paul, because there's only one Paul and you can't have him, but like, find somebody. I would call Jasmine really and just be like, hey, what's up with this? Just somebody to check in with.
Well, you're certainly welcome to call me anytime. And I have a question that I swear is related. So we're in the beginning of year 3 of the pandemic. I wanted to just ask, how you're doing and how your kids are doing with all the uncertainty right now. And also, what is the role of ice cream in surviving this time?
I mean, where do I start? We are doing okay. You know, our family juggles a lot. If you read the book, it's in there, right? But we've juggled a lot for the last few years, and we moved recently to State College, Pennsylvania. Like my bio isn't even updated. That's how recent it was. And we'd been in Charlottesville so long. So Charlottesville is still sort of like a home base for us. But now we are in Pennsylvania. One cool thing about this time, for one, we live in the woods, which I never thought we would. Like we have neighbors, but everybody lives on some land with like a bunch of trees, which is nice. But our kids now, they go to a K through 5 elementary school. And so for the first time ever, they all 3 of them walk in together. And on one hand, you're like, it's so sad because they're all masked up. But you know, like this is what they know now. So to partly answer your question, I am a little bit concerned about like, do we know what effect this time will have on us? Like, I can't imagine being 5 and wearing a mask at all times of the day. So am I concerned about what studies will say years down the road? Yes. But am I like really grateful that our family's been healthy and safe and led by people like Tyson Bell, where I'm like, okay, so what are we doing now with this pandemic? How to keep them safe? Yeah. Ice cream for me, little known fact, my first job was scooping ice cream in Bexley, Ohio. And I didn't like always go crazy for ice cream. I've always liked sweets, like Sour Patch Kids, whatever. But like, I think what happened was I don't know if everybody has like a before and after with the pandemic, but like the first night where I remember being like kind of freaked out, it was before we even had started wearing masks. Like the CDC was still sort of like, I don't know. I went grocery shopping and I bought like a few pints of ice cream and I texted it. We have a sister text. I'm one of 3 girls. And I texted it and I was just like, just in case stuff hits the fan, like I'll be in my bunker. I'm fine, like with my ice cream. And like it was a joke, but I think it became this thing of just like this comfort. And I get it. Like I'm gonna get like Jillian Michaels is gonna email me and be like, you need to stop like emotionally eating. But like whatever. Also, I really enjoy it. And I have the Peloton over here to like even it out. But I really think it's like, it is one of those things. I have a friend who says something like, never regret the sweets. And like, I'm not going to go eat a whole cake, but I think the point is like, we are dealing with enough crap. Like if like, you know, a scoop of ice cream or making brownies, like makes me feel some kind of way. Like I'm probably not going to go too hard on denying myself at this point. And like, we can talk later, like maybe I'll have some regrets, but I think it's just been a fun thing, a fun comfort, and something I like to share with people like you. I like to be like, oh, thanks for asking. I brought my recommendation for today's event. So I really felt like today the right ice cream was Ben & Jerry's Netflix and Chilled, both because of the main character in Jasmine's book, Frida. I feel like she could use some time to eat some ice cream and chill, and because I obviously need to and have taken, you know, I've done that all pandemic. So that's sort of the story of ice cream. Jasmine, I'll just mention one more thing is that is she 89? Don't be mad. My grandma, she loves ice cream too. And she'll eat like, one time I was like, Grandma, you know, the problem is if I buy a pint, like I'll eat the whole thing. And she was like, a pint? She was like, I have to be careful. I'll eat a whole like quart or half gallon at night. And so then I was just like, oh, it's genetic. It's fine.
So we have to wind down in a few minutes. So if you have any burning questions, you should type it into the box below. But in the meantime, I'm going to assume that there's a lot of book nerds listening to us today and watching. So could you talk about what you're reading now and what are some of the books on your TBR list?
Yeah, I'm always, oh man, I had it here. Oh, here we go. So I think I put this on my Instagram, like I am late, right? I get it. But I am loving minor feelings right now. I swear, like I've even brought out a highlighter. And like I use my special pen. It's not really special. It's not that expensive, but I use my special Sharpie that I don't let the kids touch or pull to underline already. If you guys can see that.
But don't you find you have to underline that whole book?
Well, yes. I mean, look at this. That's like page 20 some. I'm like, okay. But then I'm not just saying that because I got to read your book early. But
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. But there's a slew of books coming out, and I sort of am obsessed and want to read them all. And somehow you guys all sort of got like pinkish covers, like they're also all very beautiful. And I'll mention Bomb Shelter, I think it's called. That collection of essays that's coming out in March, I think. That's also another one I want to read. I think the author's son maybe has epilepsy, or at least had a seizure. And so anything like that, I'm just like drawn towards right away. I think what I didn't mention in this time was that Tophs' seizures have been one of the hardest things for me to deal with. They just, even though they're short, they're extremely traumatic for me. And so I think just hearing another author write about that is really, it's not exciting, right? But it's exciting to feel seen.
Oh, there's a message that says, Taylor, welcome to PA here. And I wanted to just shift to ask, how is Tophs now?
Yeah.
I'm assuming you turned in the finished manuscript a while ago. And so luckily we're reading this quite harrowing story, knowing that he ultimately ends up okay. But could you give us an update on how he's doing?
Yeah, thanks for asking. He's overall doing really well. He's really into his music. They went through a phase where they watched The Voice. So he was going around saying he wishes Kelly Clarkson was his older sister, which I think made his older sister feel some kind of way, but he didn't care. But overall doing well. The big shift is like his seizures now seem to be well controlled. It's not really a giveaway. It's in the book, but like all his seizures were happening basically right at dawn, and it's the worst. It's the scariest thing. But he hasn't had one, and I think since the summer. So that feels really good. And then the opportunities are still out there. He might take part in another genetic study through CHOP, because now we're like 3 hours from Philly. Lee, it looks like you're in Philly, which seems like a really cool place. Shout out to Harriet's. I think they're in Philly. So I need to make some more trips. Harriet's bookstore. But anyway, he's doing well overall. He's got a good team of teachers. He's coming home and doing math and showing me fractions, which is just so fun because I don't really do math, but the fact that he does makes me really happy.
I'm going to do the thing now where I'm going to give you a hard question that I've gotten, but
I'm just going to disappear.
So what do you want readers to take away from your book?
Oh man. Yeah. I
answer that however you want.
I have thought about that. But I think what I came away with is that I want readers to come to the book, first of all. And there are so many things you could take away from it, but what I really want them to do is feel like they have a place to come and sit. That's really funny. There's this guy named Gilly from Charlottesville, and he's really concerned with infrastructure and like all these things that I don't understand. And he's always like, Charlottesville needs more park benches for people to just sit. And it's funny, that sort of image has stuck with me as I've written this book. Like, I want this book to be a place where you like pull up, like you find your park bench, you sit, and you like, whether you feel seen or you feel like hiding, but relating to what we've been through. I think that's what I want more so than like something that you can necessarily like take away from it. I just want you to kind of like pull up and sit.
A viewer named Kathy would like to ask a question, so feel free to type that into the question box at the bottom of the screen. In the meantime, I want to ask something that I spot on your Twitter, which is that you've been planning how you're going to celebrate your launch day for a while and what food you're going to eat. So I don't know if it's secret, but if you feel like telling us, how are you going to celebrate?
It's not a secret, and if it weren't COVID, I would invite you all. But I ordered pizza from this place called Rubino's in Bexley. I mean, this place is like, it's been there for years. They still only take cash or check. And it's like this amazing thin crust pizza with like the curly pepperonis. Not that any of this matters. Just the right amount of sauce. I'm so exposed, even more than when I wrote the book. But it's gonna be shipped here like on dry ice. Yeah, Amy Chaflet would know Rubino's. And so I'm really excited about that. And let's be honest, like I also ordered ice cream that I cannot access here otherwise, and that will also be shipped. And that will be like featured in my next talk with Nikki Chung next week. Every chat, I hope, will be sponsored by an ice cream. And so I'll bring that next time. But a little like spoiler, it's from Grater's. I don't know if you've ever had that, but it's like a French pot method ice cream. And I don't know what that means, except that it's really good. And that the chunks of like, if you like milk chocolate or whatever, the chunks are really big. They're like boulders.
So we have 3 questions that have just popped up, and we're going to see if we can answer them. One of them, I think, is from your mom's cousin, Kathy.
Yeah. Hi, cousin Kathy.
Yes. Hi, Taylor. Congratulations on getting your book written and published. So cool. I love your idea on finding structure for your story idea by reading other books. How long did it take to write your book? I'm wondering if it was challenging to stay the course.
So challenging. It is helpful to have like a team, like an editor. I've seen Megan Fishman on here, my publicist, and even she reached out. Like it wasn't even time for her to reach out to me, and she reached out to like sort of help cheer me on and talk to me about just life. And so I think, and Rachel, I think she's on here. Just having a team sort of cheering you on can help. I do understand that sometimes it goes the other way, where you write the book and then you like get the contract. And so I think that could be hard to like keep going. But for me, just having like a little bit of a routine, and that's been hard. I didn't mention with COVID, like going to the coffee shop was my place. Like that was my time. And even if I went there and messed around and like ordered stuff online that I couldn't afford, like it was still part of my routine. And so I would say like routine, and then I'm big on that cheer section. And it doesn't mean only people who will like lie to your face. Like, again, Nikki's one of those people who will look at something and be like, this has potential, but it's not there. And I think you need people like that too, to be like, hey, I'm with you, but I'm not publishing that. So those would be my suggestions.
We're going to try to fit a few more in. This is really interesting given what's going to happen to your life next week with the book coming out. Taylor, this is from Evie. Taylor, have you found that you're treated differently given your public presence now in medicine or school? Do you feel like you don't have to fight as hard to be heard?
I'm not really known yet, which is great because Tophs mostly is like my like on the road marketer. And so like we'll go to an appointment and he'll interrupt the doctor and be like, you know, you're talking to someone famous, right? And he doesn't like mean it in a snooty way. He like doesn't have that filter. He just goes right.
Does he realize that the book is about him?
Yeah.
And that he's asking people to read a book about him?
Oh, he's very aware. He's very aware. And I think that's what makes it fun. Like I remember before I even like really started writing, I asked him how he felt about that. And he was like, yeah, I think we should tell people. I told you I would get lost. Sorry, what was the question?
The question was, has it become easier to advocate for Tophs now that you're going to be known as a published author and you're going to have more of a voice like publicly, even if not necessarily in the regarding school and medicine? Like, do you think it's going to get easier?
Mm. I don't, but also like I feel like part of me should be like, I talk about like that gnome that sits on my shoulder that's like, Taylor, be positive, like have hope. And so I feel like maybe I should have a little hope that it will. I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of traction it gets. Like when I go to an appointment tomorrow, they're gonna be like, "Oh, you wrote a book, cool." Like my uncle wrote a book. Like that's usually what people say. Like, I want to write a book like in my spare time, and I'm like you run a company, like go do that. I mean, it's fine. Like everybody should write books, but I don't know. Like it would be great if it like just like made like a little bit of a dent, and made it easier for somebody to come in, in a year or 2 years or 5 years, and maybe they can point to a part of the book and be like, here's how I feel. Read this. I want to be heard at this IEP meeting, and I think, or I want to be heard in the ER. Like whatever it is, I think it could be helpful. But I guess maybe my imagination isn't big enough yet to be like, oh, this thing is gonna like change the world, Well, like maybe my cheerleaders will tell me that.
This question appeared in the comments section on the right, which was really delightful, and I thought this might be a good place for us to end. How did your children react when you told them about mom's book contract and when you told them that mom is a published author? Were they as impressed as they were with Kelly Clarkson?
I mean, Kelly is like bae in our household. Like I don't even know. Like I'm like, Kelly, like what are Kelly's politics? Like who? What? I don't know anything about Kelly. All I know is like she has had like some kids, and like she like got big at 19, and now she's still like amazing. So I don't think I could ever live up to Kelly Clarkson in this house, but it's been really cool. I would say my oldest daughter in some ways is most like me as far as like very quiet, like in public, gonna look around, gonna observe, not gonna tell you what's on her mind. You're gonna have to read her mind. But is really big into celebrations. And like both of us, like our birthdays are all about us, and it better be a whole day. And so watching her celebrate me, I have this picture on my phone where her face when I got my box of books and opened them up, it's just amazing. And so I think just watching the way she reacts when I turned in my last big draft to Julie, like before copy edits and all of that, she hung signs around the house that was like, "Yay, you did it. Your book is done." Things like that. So it's definitely been fun. And maybe because I'm so quiet like her in some ways, watching her reaction has been just a thrill.
I have a funny story related to that, which is that my daughter was so young when I was finishing my book that she thinks part of being a mom is typing at a computer. So when she was with her nanny we were very lucky to have childcare during the pandemic, and she would be with her nanny with one of our old keyboards that we weren't using anymore, and we'd be banging on it, and that would be her version of being a mom.
Aww.
So
I love it.
We have to wrap up, but I, of course, encourage all of you to buy Taylor's beautiful memoir, and I wanted to say congratulations on the publication of your book, and I hope that next week is completely joyful and thrilling, whatever shape it takes, and I'm so honored to help you launch it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone for being here.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Thank you for bearing with us, Jasmine. I'm so sorry you had technical difficulties once we launched. The book is actually here now at Women and Children First. We got early release, so order today. It is as warm and full of love and community as this incredible conversation. So I hope you will place your orders with that buy the book button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll see you back here for Jasmine's release next Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.